Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump are at odds. While Trump recoups from his second near assassination attempt, Mitch McConnell is out there and certainly concerned about military spending and potentially raising taxes. Chris Bedford, senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent for Blaze Media, explains this riff in his latest Beltway brief at theblaze.com/Bedford. And he joins us now. Chris, it's been a few days, so excited to have you back on the program. And let's deep dive into this division between McConnell and Trump.
It's great to be back. It's great to feel good again. So McConnell and Donald Trump and McConnell and GOP donors and McConnell and the Republican base have really not been on the same page for a long time. McConnell, I've written about this for the Blaze before, really is best summed up as someone leading his own party of appropriators with their own specific agenda. For him, his additional little interests usually are Republican judges, which can be helpful from time to time to the GOP, but also protecting campaign finance reform and stopping that from going through. Now, recently, he wants to stake his legacy on the Ukraine war. So we come off this weekend where Donald Trump has now undergone his second assassination attempt. And we come off this past week where House Republicans are fighting, although not doing too well, fighting to attach the SAVE Act to a continuing resolution. This is something, by the way, that the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, has been pushing for. He did so again today, very angrily, very loudly, said, if you don't pass this SAVE Act, if you don't do this thing that we've been talking about in the show now for months, then there's no reason to negotiate with Democrats. Maybe you guys in Capitol Hill should get used to winning as opposed to simply losing. Mitch McConnell's ignoring all of that. He has his lunch, which helps set the agenda every single week that the Senate's in session. The Republican leadership holds its members-only off-the-record Tuesday lunch. And everyone files in here kind of expecting to get their marching orders. And the entire thing is essentially, at least the main thing, the main thrust of the lunch is a presentation by the Rand Corporation about how more money as a percentage of GDP needs to be going to the Pentagon, and that maybe raising taxes is the way to do that. It's off message for what the Republican campaign is doing, which is campaigning on lower taxes and making tax cuts. It's off message from Republican and I think American criticism of the Pentagon, which right now is at all-time recruitment lows. Is no one's been fired yet, as was pointed out in the debate and repeatedly before. No one's been fired for the disastrous and deadly withdrawal from Kabul. Not a single consequence. Mitch McConnell wants to send them more money. And this is kind of part of his broader strategy and a lot of the Senate GOP strategy, which is to try to tie the hands of an incoming administration, especially if it's Trump's, on foreign policy by eventually negotiating a deal that would allow for spending on the Ukraine war for, if Lindsey Graham were to get his way, up to 10 years appropriated by Congress and protected by Congress. That sets him up for a clash with basically everyone else on the right.
Chris, it's worth stopping for a minute just to explain to people, because it's hard to accept this is the way it is. And you might characterize it differently than I would, but to explain to people that Mitch McConnell is essentially his own side, his own power base, right? He represents Washington, D.C., and that he is able to keep that position because he has hundreds of millions of dollars that he uses, some people would say like a mob boss, and doles out to Senate candidates to keep them going. So what you need to understand if you're in the audience is that if you are in charge of your party in the Senate, that means you control a pot of money that you dole out. That's what keeps you in charge. I mean, can you talk about that a little bit in your own words and how people just need to understand? I mean, if you're going to look at this in terms of power, this is its own power base, right? He's out from under Trump.
Yes, exactly. The Senate Leadership Fund, which he is in charge of and pulls the strings on, is one of the main things that provides cash if you want to be a U.S. senator, or if you want to defend your seat against a primary challenge, or if you want to defend your seat against the Democratic Party. Mitch McConnell is explicit on this. If you're a Republican senator who crosses him in any way, you're not getting that money. And his people, which are throughout Washington, he's the longest serving party leader in Senate history. His people are well entrenched. They're in all the certain networks. They're the kind of folks who will make a call. Let's say you're a campaign consultant and you say, I'm going to take a job with this Tea Party candidate back in 2010, maybe, or maybe this MAGA candidate in 2018. And it's not the person that Mitch McConnell wants. And his team are going to call you and say, if you take this job, you'll never work in this town again. And oftentimes that's an empty threat, but not with these guys. I mean, you will work. I know some people who are extremely successful, but you'll never get the party's candidate again. You'll never get the preferred people. They decide who they're going to back. They decide who they're going to throw to the wind. It's an incredible amount of power, and it's not even just in Mitch McConnell. It's like in any classic power structure or any machine. It's in all the people who are now dependent on that. And most likely, depending on who the next party leader is after he leaves office in November, it's going to be those people who take over the infrastructure. The folks that McConnell's empowered over 10, 20 years aren't just going to disappear. They're going to continue because they've still got all of the access, all the insider knowledge. And it's something he wields. If you look at McConnell's career, he can be extremely effective on certain things. But one of his main powers is pulling Republican votes over to Democratic causes and getting them the votes they need to pull together what they call a bipartisan coalition. That's what he'll call his big policy wins. And because he does that, Democrats will allow him to tack on his little party, his personal wants, his needs, whether it's the Ukraine war now or it's something on campaign finance or something for his home state. They don't care. It doesn't get in the way of their agenda. And it makes him one of the kingmakers of D.C.
Bedford, you want to talk about entrenched politics. Let's move on to the Teamsters, because they made news today because they're not going to endorse a presidential candidate for the first time since 1996. What is your assessment of what you see there from the Teamsters?
Well, I think they read their internal polling. I mean, the union membership in general has been moving more and more towards Donald Trump. He's speaking their language, and the Democrats more and more are not. I mean, Kamala Harris is very bad at this. Even when she goes out and talks to black audiences, she can put on her accent, but she's talking about white female college professor ideas. It's the same thing when she goes to union audiences. She's not able to fit in remotely in the same way that someone like Trump, despite wearing brownie suits, has always been able to do. He's a kind of a guy's guy. And the Teamsters are an interesting set because that union, it's a very physical work union. It's almost entirely men. And that makes it different from the SEIU or other places, which generally speaking is going to make it more conservative, more Republican leaning. They used to have kind of a complicated past. One, they hated the Kennedys, as is well known. If you watch any great mob movies, that might come up. So they backed Reagan. They backed Nixon. But the last time they endorsed a Republican for president was 1988. The next election, they endorsed Bill Clinton. And then, like you mentioned, they kind of started to hold their nose because, well, leadership is largely in the bag for Democrats, although they did speak at the RNC this year. The members just aren't going to do it. So they're not ready to fully change tail and move parties yet, but their members just won't let them back the Democrats. And now it's Kamala Harris. And even before that, Joe Biden likely was going to lose that support.